countries. At what stage do you think tech and the state will kind of merge? I know that in the Emirates we have a very, very active government working in the tech field, trying to sort of jumpstart all kinds of innovation projects. In at least 3 of the Emirates, the key Emirates. And there's a tremendous amount of money and connectivity being brought to the table. And there are also massive investments globally taking place. If you look at countries like Russia and China, where there is an incredibly close relationship between the tech industry and government, although it's very kind of opaque, we don't actually know what kind of relationships are there. How do you foresee perhaps sort of non-democratic countries, or let's say less democratic countries than sort of Western European ones? I mean, we are a consensus-based state, and so there's a tremendous amount of sort of love and passion and traditional kind of types of loyalty. So we're all in the same boat, we're all on the same page. How do you see that relationship between tech and state coming together, if at all?
I don't think we see it as coming together, and I think the question of sovereignty is not something that on a personal basis that I think belongs to the industry at all. I think we would continue to argue and actually defend the role of governments, defend the role of international organizations. And what I would say is that I think in sort of the world that we're living in right now, also with the pandemic, having more voices defending an international rules-based architecture. Where organizations, international organizations, will play an important role, will certainly remain one of the vocal voices in that area. I think what you're indicating is of course that some of these new technology companies and their technologies can be heavily influential in the design of how societies are working. Fully utilizing automation, I think, is a super good example of where technologies are providing opportunities, but also challenging a couple of countries around the world. I used to serve in the fantastic country of Indonesia. I still miss it. That's a country that had a very clear strategy of trying to take over some of the production labor that became increasingly expensive in China because of the rise in labor cost. At the same time, the government formulated that approach, and I'm being a little bit black and white on this one. In comes automation, and if you look at, for example, the automotive industry, in Indonesia, a lot of those traditional jobs were taken over by robots, literally. So I think we have to acknowledge that these new technologies are fantastic in creating opportunities, but in some cases it will also create challenges. Ultimately, I think the dialogue and the fact that we can work together, respectful of the fact that governments have the ultimate say in this, is the right way forward. If we can be helpful and contribute with better awareness of the opportunities of AI or machine learning, or working remotely on teams, fantastic. But the boundaries will have to be set by countries and international organizations.
Okay, so Microsoft is a traditionalist when it comes to global architecture.
You can say that we're traditionalists, but I think we're also a realist in the sense that we understand that some of the technologies that we're developing are challenging the traditional structures of the Westphalian state, if you like. But I think that's not the same as saying that we want a completely different architecture, and that we don't understand the importance of the role of governments. It will never be up to the industry to set rules and regulations or policies. That will continue to be the role of democratically elected officials or government officials in this case.
But tech overall has different approaches also. There's at least one major tech company that has famously taken over a certain area of a North American city and is really designing it according to its own sort of ideal standards in terms of data collection and management. And that actually sounds very tempting to a certain extent. So in the way that we are given free apps online in exchange for the information that we give them, can you imagine a situation where an entire country would say, listen, come along, manage us, milk us for whatever revenues you need, but sort of maintain a certain standard of social living? Just thinking outside the box, could you ever envisage something like that? Because I have heard at least one major hedge fund manager trying to convince a country to hand over a province to him for 10 years so that he could manage it. And you know, these are sort of out of the box fantasies. But could you ever imagine something like that? Maybe not for Microsoft, but for another company?
I think, you know, having spent quite a lot of time in Silicon Valley, I probably met a couple of venture capitalists that would have a similar approach to how to run the world. You know, Omar, I don't see that, and in
Yeah,
fact, I would just say that, you know, I'm relatively new to sort of the tech world. I've just worked in it for the last 4 years, but I
yeah,
think even in those 4 years, I think it has developed into a more mature discussion. And I would
mhm,
say that I think it's matured both on the government side, on the public side, but also on the private side. So I think it'll
mhm,
be difficult to find representatives that would argue that it's a fantastic idea for a private company to take over your basic functions of governments or
yeah.
states in terms of
Although it
delivering
has happened
services.
historically with
Well, I think
India and the East India Company.
you've seen certain examples on it.
Yeah,
What I would say is that you know, I'll avoid naming names here, but I think
yeah,
just in the last couple of weeks, we've also seen some of the other big technology companies coming forward, you know, in Europe to say we would actually welcome the European Union being firmer on regulations, being firmer on
yeah,
creating policies that we need to adhere to,
yeah,
and you know, that has raised criticism saying, you know, you're very late to the party. A lot of other companies have been saying this for years, but
yeah,
I don't think actually that's the most important thing to say. I think acknowledging that there is a mind shift taking place also on the among executives in the big technology companies, acknowledging that, you know, life is difficult when you develop new technologies, including
mm,
technologies that are incredibly influential over you and me and
mm,
our
yeah,
fellow citizens. And actually the best way of making sure that we have a level playing field is for governments to create the right frameworks around that. In some places that's going to be super difficult and hard because of the complexities of new technologies,
yeah,
but the general approach in saying, well, we would actually welcome, again, just using the example of facial recognition, we would welcome regulation in this area so we know how to develop our technologies and how to make sure that our engineers are navigating in the right way.
mm,
And then, you know, if we take facial recognition, actually the state of Washington actually came forward with, I think, the world's first regulation around facial recognition, and we welcome that. We think it's helpful that the guardrails are being defined by governments and decision makers.